So we've got After Effects open. Remember again, when you fire up After Effects, you want to hold down Command Option Shift while you're launching After Effects from the dock to start it up in default mode. Notice again when it starts up in default mode, it's in default. Of course, we're going to change this over to standard mode, which is the mode we'll be using most of the time. And now, of course, what we want to do is we want to set up our AEP file. So we'll go File, and we'll basically go Save As and Save As. So we can now establish our AEP file. And of course, we want to give it a name. So we'll call it L1. And then I'm going to put a small v with a number 1 indicating it's version 1. I want to navigate back to my desktop. And I want to find my lesson 2 folder that I've saved and named. And there it is right there. So I'm going to select that folder. And of course, I want to make sure this is going into the right folder. So I'm going to put it into the end project folder. And again, you can see I misnamed it. I called it L1. So I'm just going to cancel that quickly. And again, make sure that, when you're doing this, you're naming your projects properly. It's very easy to just do what I just did. So again, we'll go L2 and then a V1, again indicating it's the right folder, desktop, proper folder, and then in that folder I want to make sure it's going into the end project file, so that way I know that that is being saved. Also, After Effects on the main menu, Preferences, and what I want to do is I want to go and check my auto save. And what I want to do is, because I started up in default settings, it's going to go back to 20 minutes, which is like way too long. So you want to change that to 5 minutes. So it's saving every 5 minutes. And then of course, next to project. And this way here, if I forget to save every 5 minutes, After Effects is going to back me up by doing an auto save. And again, if you get into problems, you can always go back to previous saves instead of starting all over again, which is, one of those things that can be a little problematic. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set up our composition. In the last project, we used a file to establish our composition. In this project, we're actually going to create a new composition. So the long way to do it is go to Composition on the main menu, and you can see New Composition appear. And everything else is grayed out because, well, it's just not active yet, because until you establish things like composition, none of that stuff's going to become available. You see the shortcut is Command N. When you get used to using the shortcuts, it's great. It does save you a lot of time. Now, of course, you can see Composition Settings dialog box, Composition Name. First thing we want to do is give it a name. So we're going to call it Destinations. What we're doing is we're creating a little bumper here for a TV broadcast that's going to kind of appear somewhere in between shows or after commercials or whatever. The next thing we want to do is we want to make sure we're using the right codec. Again, because we're in default, it's just going to come up with the default codec. Now, there's literally a ton of different codecs, and I'm not really going to spend a lot of time talking about codecs. That's stuff you're going to learn in some of your other courses. But for today, what we're going to do is we're going to look for a simple old school NTSC D1 format. NTSC, which was the old analog system of television. And you can see there's some information right there, 720 by 480, as opposed to what we normally work with now, which is 1080, and much wider screen. And of course, frame rate, drop frame time code, and again, stuff that you're going to encounter in your other tech courses that'll help further explain that. And of course, the last thing I want to do is what's different from After Effects and other programs that you've probably never used before is you have to tell it how long your composition is going to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to select all those numbers, and we're just going to go in and put a value of 300. And you can see it's going to do the calculation for you. It's going to turn that into a 3-second composition. The duration by default is 30 seconds. Well, we don't need 30 seconds. We only need 3 seconds, and again, it'll calculate it based on that drop frame time code. So that will now establish our composition. Now, again, usually what I like to do is I like to go File, Save As. Anytime I make any changes, Now, again, it's debatable at this point whether I need to change that V1 to V2, because all I'm really doing is kind of setting it up. So at this point, I'm just going to basically overwrite. You can see it's asking me, like, you sure you want to do that? Generally, you don't want to overwrite previous saves, just because, you usually want to have, something to fall back on in case whatever you do now is going to be a mess. But because really all I'm doing is setting up the workflow, I'm just going to replace it. But in the future, you want to make sure that you are saving incremental versions of it, because it is kind of important. Now, what we're going to do, you can see in our project panel, we're going to select the project panel, make sure that the composition we created is deselected, and just a little shortcut here, double click in there. And what we're going to do now is navigate to our desktop, to our lesson 2 folder, and of course into our assets folder. And you can see there's 2 types of assets in here. Again, what you got to do is you got to be careful with your assets, because this program can access many different formats. You got to be careful what kind of asset you're working with. JPEG, pretty much a no-brainer. You can see it's not really going to give you too many options. It's just going to come in as footage. However, Destinations Logo AI, if you go down there to where it says import as, it gives you some options. AI is basically an Adobe Illustrator file. And Adobe Illustrator, like Photoshop, has the ability to create files that contain layers. So that's kind of important, because if I don't import it properly, then it is going to basically kind of squash all those layers, which means I can't access those layers to go in there later to make any changes to it. So what I want to make sure is I'm importing that as a composition. So I'm just going to go composition and retain layer sizes open. And again, you can see the difference is that it comes in as 2 things. So there's the composition for the asset called Destinations Logo. That's the master composition. So this is basically a secondary composition. And then, of course, in that little folder, that actually contains all the layers that were part of that composition. So again, that's kind of important to understand the relevance and importance of that. Because if you don't realize the issues there, it can become pretty problematic for you. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is double click here, and I'm going to go and get the JPEG. And again, I don't really have to do any changes here because it is just a JPEG, so it's a flattened file. And I bring it in there, and there it is. Again, I'm going to click on that project file, hit that tilde key, and expand that folder. And again, I want to point out the fact that you can see any file that I import contains a link. So that means that I can't really change the name of that file in this project panel. However, you can see the compositions, because they're created within the program, don't have those file paths. So these compositions are fair game. If I want to change the names of those, it's not going to cause media to go offline. But you can see these other assets here. If I change the name of these files in this project panel, they're going to go offline. So be very, very wary of those problems. Okay, so now I'm going to go File, Save As. And because I've made quite a few modifications here, I'm actually going to call this V2. Because again, what I want to do is I want to have multiple versions saved in case I screw something up and I have backups. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that JPEG, which is going to be my background. I'm going to take it and I'm just going to add it into my composition. And right away you're going to see, wow, what's going on there? Well, the problem is, again, if I go up to this panel here and I hit that tilde key, if you look at the size of that file, that Parthenon file, it's huge. It's like 1600 by a heck of a lot. So so what I want to do now is I need to not use that file the way it is. So I am going to change that setting. Now I've got a little problem with Splashtop, so I'm going to stop this recording and I'll come back in a second.